Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations. I always look forward to one of my favorite colleagues, Gina Breslin. Gina, welcome to our podcast this morning. Gina is the leader of our hiring and talent selection area here at North Group. And so I have the privilege of working with she and her team quite regularly as we look for right fit candidates for our clients. Gina, when we're thinking about fit, this kind of elusive idea, why do we always start with the organization itself? We do, right?
Yeah, absolutely we do. I think you need to look in the mirror. I think you need to have a clear understanding of your organization and how it behaves. Because if you don't have that picture of your current location, we often use that language, how will you possibly know who or what it is that you're looking for? How will you figure out right fit if you don't know, if you can't describe what it takes to be successful in your organization?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think one of the things that we maybe haven't talked about enough, I think we would think about it internally, but not so much externally, is when we're talking about this fit, a lot of times we're talking about, what would some of the terms be? Chemistry, culture, working environment, leadership, all these sort of elusive, amoeba-like things. But I think where we need to start in an organization is, are you already right where you want to be with those things, with chemistry, with culture, with leadership? So that would be one question. Are you right where you want to be? Are you almost where you want to be, and you want to make sure that the candidate we're bringing into this team helps us to get there? Or is there a gap, and is it this candidate that we're going to ask to close that gap? We need to answer those questions because all of those questions speak to the hiring process and what we're looking for, don't they?
Absolutely. Are you hiring for conformity or are you hiring for change? Are you looking to strengthen that current culture? Or are you looking, like you said, is what you're seeking aspirational? It's out there. You haven't arrived yet. And so can this candidate that you're seeking get you to where you want to be?
Most of the hiring engagements we have are at some sort of, shall we say, influence level in the organization. They're project manager, they're a leader of the customer service unit, they're a vice president if we get into titles, a CFO, a CEO, a COO. Do you think it's fair to say that whenever you bring a new person into the organization, there is some kind of feel or cultural change that's going to occur? Is that fair?
Yes, I would agree. And I think it's Truett Cathy, who's the founder of Chick-fil-A, who says if you hire the right people again and again over time, you'll completely strengthen your culture.
Well, I love that, but what's right?
That's what we got to figure out. That's the hard part.
So that's why we start with the organization, sort of we call it current location.
Yes, correct.
Like, where are you right now? And where do you want to be in the future? And are you looking for this person/position that we're bringing in to help you along that roadmap that we're drawing together? And if so, what's their role in that?
Correct. Yeah, understanding that's huge. I mean, if we take Chick-fil-A for an example, clearly their culture, they've got to figure it out. You walk into Chick-fil-A, often you have the same experience. They're very intentional about that. But it takes a lot of work to get there. And so that becomes the starting point, looking in the mirror and understanding, again, your current location.
Once we have some clarity on that between us and the client, then we're looking to define basically 3 areas
Correct.
for each hire that we're doing. What are those 3 areas, and what would you say is the relative importance of each of those areas?
So 3 areas, correct. The characteristics, the skills, and the experiences of your ideal candidate. Who
they are, what they can do, and where they've been.
That kind of absolutely. Okay. That's the language we often use. All right. And most important, most of us get stuck in the experience, the where they've been.
Why do you think that is?
I think that people get attracted to the experience side because those folks can speak your language.
Okay.
They come with this technical competence. They can jump right in, and what's not to love about that? And you start to get into the tactical. Here are the elements where we need help. I think this person can jump in. But what do we forget about? We forget about the characteristics piece and how behaviors, at North Group, we say being comes before doing, and how the behaviors of that individual are so much more important.
You and I talk about this a lot. We talk about this a lot at North Group, is how do we appropriately value characteristics? How do we appropriately value skills, experiences? We can get trapped in the experience thing too.
Sure.
Particularly at the beginning of the process when the letters of interest and the resumes and the CVs start to come in, because at that point, all we have is essentially a digital paper.
Correct.
To look at.
Exactly.
And it's really hard to see through that to what we're actually looking for. And so to some degree, experience on a certain level certainly has value. You're just speaking to its relative importance from a leadership standpoint.
Absolutely. There are some non-negotiables. For example, if we're hiring a CFO for a multifaceted, complex organization, we likely need a certain level of education and a certain level of experience.
Sure.
Those are the non-negotiables. But Roger, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just boxes that you check. Do they have these non-negotiables? Now, it can get tricky, if you will, or we can, get coerced into thinking other things are more important when we start to get too focused on that. But at the end of the day, you're right, those leadership characteristics, that's what influences behaviors in an organization.
And that's, I think that's why I love being involved in the evaluation, if you will, the interview process. But it's also extraordinarily challenging because as you meet these folks, they've become sophisticated along the way. And in some cases, they become sophisticated in presenting themselves in a certain way.
Sure.
What is it that we and our clients would have to work through to see to determine, I guess I would say, whether we're seeing a caricature that this person has created or whether we're experiencing them the way that their coworkers will experience them in the future?
That is such a great question because you are correct. Some folks just interview well.
Yeah.
They've done it a lot. They know they're good at it. Other people, I mentioned before this idea of speaking our language, we tend to relate more easily with people who use the same communication style that we do. And so that can be attractive and trip us up. And so how do we figure out those characteristics? You can't just ask a candidate, what are your top most important characteristics?
You don't think that's a good question?
I mean, you could ask them. I'm sure they'll tell you something.
So let's go on a little detour here.
Right.
And this is a good conversation for those folks who are listening. So historically, it's a fairly common question to say, what do you think are your most valuable leadership characteristics?
Yes.
Would we ask that question?
No, we would not.
Why not?
Because this is just your opinion. And at the end of the day, the candidate, they're trying to get a job.
Yeah.
Right? That's their goal. It sits at odds with what we're trying to do.
Right.
We're trying to figure out if they are a right fit or if they are if they align the greatest with this profile that we've created.
So do you think it's actually possible that if you ask that question to a candidate, they might not tell you?
Probably not. I think they would come up with something that sounds pretty good. I think they might be tempted to. Sure.
Yeah. Right. I like the one where some kind of question is asked about, what are the areas of improvement that you most need to be focused on, and the most ingenuine answers I think we get are the ones where they take what are generally perceived as positive characteristics and just flip them on their head. And I would say the most, you've experienced this, right?
Yes, I got one right at the top of my head.
Go ahead. What is
it?
What is it?
Well, I take on too many things.
Yes.
I'm such a hard worker. I overdo it.
Yes,
give me a break.
Right. I'm always the last one leaving at 7:30 on a Friday evening. My work ethic really gets in the way.
Yes.
Or here's the other one, patience.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I really need to work on patience. Well, tell me more about that. Well, I'm such an achiever. I'm so goal oriented that I just sometimes, I get to pressing too hard on these things and maybe asking too much of other people. Now, I might dig into that answer.
Sure.
But I find those questions, those answers to those types of questions to be,
They seem a little self-serving.
yeah, they put my antenna up a little
just a
bit.
little.
And I'd really like to get to, is there something you're actually
Yeah.
working at?
Or there's the candidates who can't think of any. I just can't think of anything.
Yeah.
What? Are you serious? Because my list is really long.
Yeah,
but
I wake up thinking
I just
about this
have
in the
no
morning.
idea what I could, improve upon.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
So it's a lot of fun interviewing folks.
So sometimes we are asked, and I think rightly so, you and I have been in a number of sessions where we were being interviewed for that organization to decide whether they wanted North Group to represent them. And they'll often say to us, well, what makes North Group's process better or different, maybe than other people we might be talking to? Well, of course, we never really feel comfortable or even think we should compare ourselves to other people. But we often talk about this, I'll put quotes around it,
sure.
concept of behavioral interviewing. Talk about that a little bit and what the art and science of that is.
Sure. I mean, it's essentially what we were talking about. You can ask people very direct questions and get canned answers.
Okay.
But the idea of behavioral-based interviewing questions is that you're asking situational questions. Tell me about a time when, or describe a situation where. Because people can make up stuff on the canned answer if you just ask those more straightforward questions. But if you continue to dig into, in the past, how have you? For example, we could talk about conflict. So instead of just telling me, how do you approach conflict, you could say, describe a time when you took personal accountability for conflict and you initiated a conversation. What did you learn? What happened? Describe a situation where you had to settle an argument between two people. What did you do? What was the result? Again, what did you learn, or what would have you done differently? So a little bit more reflective. And so the idea of past behavior could be an indicator of how they'll perform or how they'll move forward in the future.
Yeah, that's terrific. And as you're going down that path, trying to create a real life, genuine conversation, I find that that's better, but it's not perfect.
Correct. Sure.
Often I'll hear a description that somebody gives me of how they handled something, and for some reason it just won't quite ring
Doesn't
true.
sit right.
And I'm sure you have that experience. When you're in that situation, how do you get past that? How do you dig into that, so to speak?
So I think you're right on. I think in that moment you have to trust your gut, if you will, and dig deeper into that question.
Yeah.
So just ask another layer question to address whatever it is that's causing that red flag to stand.
You know what I find a lot? I find this in our coaching situations too, similar, is that people will often describe to me how they handled a situation. And what they're really describing is something that occurred in their mind. That was their plan, but they didn't actually execute it. And so I'll often just follow up with a very straightforward question. I'll say, wow, that sounds really artful. Did you actually have that conversation? Or is that the conversation you wish you had? Or is it some combination thereof? And I find once you get to that point, and you've established some sort of relationship with the person at that point, they can't quite avoid admitting that it's not that they were lying. It's just that they're combining some plan that they had, some aspiration that they had for handling the conversation, and the way they act. And what I find is people are almost never as direct in person as what they're telling you they were.
That makes me think of an interesting. So when we advocate for a very consistent, structured interview process.
Yes.
We're trying to figure out human behavior. And so one of the best ways to do that is to have a structured process step by step.
And layered interviews.
Correct.
A number of people involved.
Yes, absolutely. And in that moment, if you're not careful, you will have candidates who go on and on
Yeah.
to answer one of your questions,
Yeah.
or on and on with their agenda, the things that they want to tell you. And as an interviewer, one of the things that you want to make sure you're doing is learning what it is that you need to know. So what triggered that was I find myself sometimes I'm naturally, I can be a good listener. And so I'm listening, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, 10 minutes have gone by and they're not answering my question.
Yeah.
And so I need to be a little bit more bold than maybe I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with, and actually interrupt them and change the conversation and just kind of stop what they were telling me to move in a different direction so that I'm learning what I want to know, not just what they want to tell me.
And Gina, I think that while it may seem rude to you at the time, and you have a fairly sensitive personality,
Right,
maybe
sure,
that's
right.
maybe harder for you to do, but that's more real life type stuff. Because
Yes.
when that person's going to be, let's say, in a leadership team in the future, it's very common for you to go on some sort of that person to go on
Sure.
some sort of tangent, and somebody else on that leadership team to think this is not what we need to be talking about. It's not even the question that was in, and they cut in on you, and
Sure.
seeing how they respond to that.
Yes. It's another data point.
Is pretty, and to your point, another data point. One of the things that you and I often talk about, I'm sure you talk about it with other team members here at North Group, is when we get toward the end of an interview process, you've interviewed the person, I've interviewed the person, they've met other people at North Group, they've met other people at the client's
Sure.
location. The client has interviewed them. Perhaps several people have interviewed them. They've taken them out to lunch, put them in a different type of setting, all these types of things that can be valuable. And we all get together again, and as you've aptly described, bring all these qualitative data points to the conversation. And we're trying to focus them on how close do all these data points add up to what we originally set out to hire.
Right.
I feel like sometimes we, and I'm going to use a harsh word,
Sure.
lose. That North Group loses something in that situation, and we maybe even give in a little bit to the client. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
And if so,
And I'm competitive, Roger. I hate to lose, but that happens
I never
sometimes.
knew that before, Gina. When we talk about that we don't quite get to where we want, what's the biggest, in your view, what's the biggest stumbling block to that?
I think the biggest stumbling block is when our clients are attracted and get focused in on the experiences, where they've been.
Yeah.
Again, it's this person coming in, speaking the language, getting tactical, and all you can think about is they're going to come in and they're going to solve problem A, problem B, problem C.
Yeah.
And we're missing what are those 4, maybe 5 most important characteristics, because we can hire very technically competent people who do not align with those characteristics. And you know what happens? A year later, I'm getting a call back and, hey, that person, unfortunately, they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
That's frustrating.
That is really frustrating. But it also is understandable in that we're defaulting to the tangible
Right.
over the intangible. And when in life are we not
Yeah.
tempted
Sure.
to
Every
do that?
day.
Would you say that, forgive the language here, but the higher the position is, the more responsible position we get into, chief operating officer or president or CEO, whatever fancy title we want to give it. Would you say that the more responsibility you have at the top of the org chart, the less important technical capability and experience in that particular industry is? Am I hearing that from you?
You are hearing that from me.
Really?
And you are absolutely right on.
You think?
Your technical experts are the people, right? The boots on the ground. You don't need to know all of that. You're the leader. You need to set the tone. You need to set the culture. You need to be the chief reminding officer. I mean, that list goes on. But
And people in that position are the ones that we're looking for to close the gap on our cultural shortfalls, to align us with the values and the mission that the organization has set out to accomplish. And that is hard work.
That is very hard work. And I also think sometimes the smaller an organization, the more important it becomes. So if you have a team of 5, 6, and that's your entire company, you're bringing in team member number 7, that exact same principle applies. So I think there's
Same
two,
as it does with 7 or 700?
Correct.
Yeah.
The leader of the 700 or one of 7. Yeah. But thanks, Roger. There's a lot of yeah, it's a lot of hard work to figure out the character skills and experiences piece. But when you put multi-steps in place, different locations or settings, if you will, all of those help to get have a really good process in place.
And with leadership, we need to remember being
Comes before doing.
Thanks, Gina.
You bet.